Hey everyone, and welcome to our June live event for National Sewing Circle. We have Nicki LaFoille here to answer all your sewing questions. So thank you for being here, Nicki.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Of course. All right, so if you're new to these live events or you've never tuned in before, Nikki's going to answer your sewing questions for the next hour. So if you have any of those questions burning that you want to ask, go ahead and type those into the chat box and we'll see those live and we'll work our way through answering those. But right off the bat, because it is, beginning of summer, and I know we're both in fairly warm areas. You're obviously in a tank top, and I recognize that from one that you did a video on for us, and you actually made it. So can you explain how you made your shirt?
Yes, absolutely. And, I live in tank tops all summer. I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so it's humid and hot, and I don't have air conditioning in my house. So I love my tank tops. So this one, I copied the pattern from a tank top that I already had in my closet that I bought, and I knew I liked the fit. So I traced that pattern off onto paper and just added seam allowances, and then used that as my pattern to cut out of new fabric. And so it was fairly easy technique, and like you said, I did a video on that on National Sewing Circle, so you can get the full technique from that video. But for a knit fabric like this, the thing that I had to watch out for was to be sure that the new fabric that I was using had the same, a very similar weight and amount of stretch as the fabric from the original garment, so that it would have a similar fit. And I didn't get it quite right, so the first tank top that I made was a little bit too tight. The fit was a little too tight because the original garment was, the stretch was a little bit looser, and this fabric, the stretch was just a little bit, a little tighter, I guess. So I just added a little bit to the pattern, and it turned out great. And the back actually is a different fabric, so that's just a little fun detail. And the neckline and the armholes are bound using a twin needle. So that's another technique that I talk about in the video. But it's great. It gives a very professional finished look, doing the binding and the twin needle. And when you use a twin needle too, that builds stretch into the seam, which is great for knit garments. So that the seam will, stretch with the knit fabric as you're pulling it on and wearing it. So it's a great choice for finishing your knit garments. And I did that for the hem as well, just using that double fold and then a twin needle. So yeah, it's a fairly quick and easy technique to do to draw that pattern from something you already have in your closet. And a tank top is a great place to start with that too, because you don't have sleeves to contend with. It's fairly simple shapes, and you can practice that technique before graduating to something else, because you can trace off t-shirts and tracing off your sleeves and pants and everything from garments you already have, but a tank top is a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you had said the first one fit a little bit too snug, and so you just added more to the pattern and then remade it. But so I'm definitely, I don't want to remake something, and if I've already have one that's almost finished, I want to try and salvage it. So, and I know you did another video for us where you actually showed how to make something longer by adding into the seam. Would you have just added into the sides, or could you have to make that a little bit bigger?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love doing that. So yeah, that video that you're talking about was adding a little panel to the shoulder seams to either make your neckline lower or just make the whole garment longer. So you could definitely do that. Add a little bit into the seam here, and also add just a little strip into the side seams to give yourself a little bit extra room. And that's kind of a cool design detail too. You can do matching fabric, or you can do contrasting fabric to have a little design detail. So yeah, that's a great way to save a project that you maybe cut too small or whatever. So yeah, totally.
Perfect. All right, Roberta asks, what brand of anti-static fabric should I be looking for to make a half slip to wear under skirts for both summer and winter weights of fabric?
So a fabric for a slip that is not staticky. So let's see. I know for linings that I've made for jackets and blazers and such. So, oh gosh, is it? I'm forgetting all my terminology now. Like
I've always just even called it lining fabric. Like when you go to like
Right.
Joann's to buy the fabric, it literally is in a section called lining fabric.
Mhm.
So I know it's a type of synthetic, and I also don't know that I can think of it right off the top of my head either. But I also don't know why I know you're doing a quick search so you can figure it out. But the only thing I would say with that fabric is that I have never used one of those that hasn't like raveled so much and like actually kind of been staticky. So it's like it's perfect once it's in the garment, but like just by itself, I'm not sure that it won't create static by rubbing against the skirt that you're wearing.
Yes. So there are a lot of different fibers that can be used as lining material as long as it is kind of slick enough um, so that it won't, stick to the fabric that is over it and cause like weird wrinkles and stuff. You want it to be
Yeah.
fairly slippery. So rayon, silk, satin, polyester, all of those can be woven in ways that make it good for lining.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, a lot of them, just because a lot of them are synthetics, it the nature of it is kind of a little bit staticky. So I think silk would probably be the least staticky just because it's a natural fiber, but it is also fairly expensive. So you could try
Yeah.
silk blend maybe. Um, but yeah, just know that I don't think that you can really eliminate static altogether, especially when you have two fabrics rubbing together like you do with a lining or a slip.
Yeah. I would go with the inexpensive that Rayon, that lining fabric they were talking about, and then you can get it. I think we used to have this like by cans just in the laundry room growing up. Always knew where it was. I forget what it's called, but it's in a blue can with an orange lid, and there's a picture of a lady with a skirt on the front of it. And it's
Yeah.
literally just this anti-static spray, and you spray it either on the inside of your skirt or the outside of the slip or both. And then if you don't have that, in a pinch, hairspray will also work. But we always just had that on hand, and even sewing with that fabric. Spray that fabric before you even start sewing, and then it won't be as staticky while you're static guard. Thank you. Yes, that's what it's called. Perfect. All right, good to know that it's never changed. I think it's been static guard in that same can since I was 5 years old, but
Yep.
for that too. All right, our next question is being a fabric. Cheryl asks, what would be the best material to buy for a shift dress?
Um, so it's very subjective. It all depends on your personal style and what if you have a specific use in mind for this dress, if it's going to be like a summer dress or if it's going to be more of a formal dress. So the fabric that you use really can determine, it can make the whole look of it. So you can take the same pattern um, and stitch it in two different fabrics and have two completely different, you can have a very informal if you stitch it out of, lawn or something that is a little bit more, uh, that wears a little bit harder, I guess. It's a little more functional,
Mhm.
or stitching it out of um, a satin or something that's got a little bit of a rayon even. Um, can make it look a little bit more formal. So it all depends, really. But for a shift dress, so the shift dress is a little bit straight lines, kind of very straightforward design. So I would say a good fabric for that would probably be a cotton lawn would be great. Um, and lawn is just let's see, lawn is either the threads are thinner or it's woven in a different way to make it a little bit softer. The hand and the drape is a little bit more flowy than like a quilting cotton, which can be a little bit stiff. So cotton lawn would be great and comfortable and breathable. So I love that. Rayon is a great one for garments as well. It can be a little bit tricky to work with because it feels like water. It can be a little bit slippery, but it also has an excellent hand, very soft, very drapey. So it would be a really comfortable one to wear as well. So those are some of my favorite garment fabrics anyway.
Perfect. All right, our next one here, Haley asks, would a twin needle be best for a t-shirt dress? I have an extra, extra large shirt that I'm turning into a dress.
Awesome. I love that. Upcycling something into something else. That's great. Yes, so twin needle is great for finishing hems of knits, like I was talking about earlier. So yeah, that would be great for your hem. For if you're doing anything to the sleeves, it'd be great for the hems of your sleeves. Yeah, to give it that stretch and also that finished professional look. So yeah, I think that's great.
All right, so if somebody is watching this and they're trying to visualize how you would take like just an extra, extra large t-shirt and turn it into a dress and make it look like a dress versus just like you're wearing a giant t-shirt. What is the process of taking it and making it into the dress?
So imagine you have a big t-shirt. It's just it's a tee. I'm imagining the sleeves are pretty big too. So you're probably going to want to take the sleeves in a little bit. And it can be as simple as starting at the edge of the sleeve and zipping down and down the side seam to just take it in a little bit and nip it in a little bit closer, to make it a little bit more fitted down in the waist and in the arm, so that it's not like this big baggy t-shirt. And you can just do that with a regular straight stitch because you're not going to need stretch in that seam because it's going mostly parallel to your body. It's not going to be pulled and stretched. So you can do that with just a straight seam, making sure to take an even amount from each side, and leaving enough to get into it, but it's a knit, so it'll stretch and mold to the body as well. So yeah, it can be as simple as that, just a couple of seams to bring it in, and then you've got yourself a new garment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now we've done a lot of talking about the twin needle with finishing and how it's going to add in stretch and all that, and that's awesome. Unless you don't have a twin needle. So if you don't have a twin needle, what would be your finishing technique? How would you do those hems, and what stitch should you use?
So a zigzag stitch is a great stitch to use to build in stretch. So yeah, your hems around your hips, around the neckline, if it's going to have to stretch over your head, because yeah, it adds stretch in, and it's just a good finishing hem stitch. But also lately, I've been loving the triple stitch.
Mm-hmm.
So the triple stitch goes 2 forward and 1 back, 2 forward and 1 back. So it builds stretch into the seam that way, but it looks like a straight stitch. So on your sewing machine, if you have it, it'll look like, it'll either look like 3 bars together, or mine just looks like a thick straight stitch, I guess, to denote that it's a couple of stitches in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it goes 2 forward and 1 back, so that when you stretch that, it can kind of, that stitch can kind of pull apart and give you that bit of wiggle room for pulling at that seam so that it doesn't snap. So I like that one because it, like I said, it looks like a straight stitch, but it builds stretch in. So I use that a lot of times for construction seams that need to add stretch in, as well as finishing. So that's a good one for if you don't have a twin needle. Both of those are good. There's also a stitch called the triple zigzag stitch, I believe. which does the same thing but in a zigzag fashion. So it kind of builds in. So it's like a zigzag stitch that's like this. It's like
Looks like a lightning bolt. It reminds me of like Harry Potter. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very, very lightning bolt shaped stitch. So that's great for extreme stretch situations where you've got, elastic also built into the fabric. It's like dance wear, lycra type bodysuits that need a lot of stretch in your stitch.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Talia asks, I'm making a purse and just got the lining. Should I make the lining a bit bigger than expected so it fits in? I always make them too small and lose space in the purse.
I wouldn't make it too much bigger because then you run the risk of having that extra lining fabric kind of bunching up inside of the bag. A lot of times, I will just make my lining the same, I'll cut the same shape as I did from the exterior out of the lining. And then I wind up having a little bit of excess in the bag anyway because I roll the seam of the upper edge of the purse sometimes toward the lining. So it pushes the lining down just a skosh because I don't want to have the lining showing at the upper edge of the purse. And of course, all purse designs can be different. So sometimes that's not an issue. That's not even something that comes up. Yeah, I think that if you cut them the same, that you should be able to tuck that lining in without having too much difference in the size of the lining versus the purse.
Yep. Absolutely. I have a couple follow-up questions on purses because I know you've done a couple of videos for us. One, I'm picturing this. I've even referenced the problem you had while making this bag on camera a couple times in other videos where your machine just stopped working. But you've done a faux leather bottom bag. But then didn't you have the zipper was set in, right? So what are some of the different things? Because I know a lot of times people, want to make a bag or want to make a purse, but they've already made like 6 and it's just a rectangle and they want to make it different. So how can you make, the purse or bag different than the last one you made?
Yeah, boy, purse designs, the sky is the limit. I that's my favorite part of the project is the designing phase because I get to draw out all the different pockets that I want in the purse and all the different design details. So yeah, the simplest thing that you can do is to put a zipper like just in the top of the purse, where the lining and the purse join. But that purse that you were talking about, I had the zipper kind of recessed down in. So it was a separating zipper, and I made like a little tab to stitch onto the zipper, and then I made the lining a couple of inches taller than the bag so that I could roll it down to the inside. I made the exterior a couple of inches longer than the lining so that rolled in and then connected to the lining, a couple of inches down inside of the back. And that seam is where I inserted that tab that had the zipper connected to it so that the zipper was, down in a little bit. But there are a lot of, cool things that you can do. You can add a flap to one upper edge where the lining and the exterior join, and then you've got a flap that flaps over to the front. And you don't even really need to add a closure to that flap if that freaks you out a little bit. You can just let it flap over, and that's cute anyway. I've seen purses, the trend, I don't know, it's probably come and gone already. I've just cottoned onto it, but the bags that have the zipper in the top, but then the whole top part of the bag kind of flaps over, and that's where you've got the strap connected is like a third of the way down the bag, so that top part of the bag becomes its own flap.
Yep.
Cool.
We actually had a pattern for one just like that. I actually did one. It's on the shop portion of National Sewing Circle, and it's the same thing, long rectangle. Actually has the angled top and then the zipper, and then it flaps over. So we have that one. So yeah.
Yeah.
So many options and different things that you can do with purses. That's perfect.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely.
Since we've been talking so much about different stitches, triple stitches, stretch stitches, triple stretch stitches, Jenna asks, how do you know when to use a certain stitch? She has a brother, CP100X, and there are so many stitches.
Yeah. The machines nowadays come with like 30 built-in stitches, and to be honest with you, I only use like 3 or 4 of them on a regular basis. If you are doing like decorative stitches, you might utilize more of them. Um, so that's something that I should probably dip into a little bit more. Like, because you can do so many cool things with the decorative stitches. There's like little flowery stitches, little geometric stitches that you could do along the border of anything. But yeah, that's something that you can kind of explore. But really, I use my straight stitch, my zigzag, my triple stretch stitch. Sometimes I use the buttonhole stitch. But really, that's it. So I have a blind hem stitch as well. That's one that is, useful and functional. Um, there are a couple of overcast stitches to, finish raw edges in lieu of a serger type thing. But yeah, you just through experience and exploration of the stitches, you kind of get a feel for when you might want to use one or another. And like I said, a lot of times some of them are functional. I also have a button stitch too, so I can just hit that and it'll turn the feed dogs off for me and stitch my button on. So that's a good functional one too. But you can go through your machine manual too to see what the stitches are and what function they have. And then when you're doing your project, if you have a use for it, you can test it out and add that to your repertoire of different stitches that you know how to use.
Yep.
But it's subjective depending on what project you're doing. And the more you use your machine and the wider variety of projects that you do, the more different stitches that you may come across that you might want to use. So all in practice.
Yeah. I think it comes down to just knowing that those stitches are even available. So like you said, flip through your manual or even if you see the pictures of them on your, however your machine is set up to see your stitches. And if you think about whatever it is that you're going to do, there's probably a stitch for it. Like if you're sitting down, like I'm going to blind hem stitch these pants, there's probably a blind hem stitch. Or same thing, if you're thinking like I need to finish this edge, gosh, I wonder if there's an overcast. There probably is. It's like whatever your task is that you're going to do, there's probably a stitch like specifically for it. So Allison wants to know if you have any tips for how to avoid seam puckering.
Yes. So seam puckering can happen and it can be very apparent too when you're stitching a fabric that is a little bit shiny. Like I made a pair of pants out of satin one time, which was as hard as it sounds. But they turned out super cool. But I had a really hard time with that, with seam puckering there. And it was tissue paper that came to my rescue in several different ways. So the tissue paper helped to give the needle just something to grab onto, kind of. And seam puckering can happen when you're using a very lightweight fabric as well, just because the thread might be, just kind of too heavy for the fabric as it's going under the foot. So that tissue paper just gives the needle and the thread something to grab onto, something a little more substantial, to lay nice and flat and get good tension. And then you can just tear that tissue paper away from the seam when you're done and give it a press. And sometimes too, just giving it a little press after the fact can flatten out that fabric that may look like the seam has puckered, but just a little bit of heat can sometimes smooth that out. But if the puckering is very pronounced and steam or pressing doesn't take care of it, try the tissue paper trick. Sometimes seam puckering has to do with bad tension. So if your tension is too tight, sometimes that thread is just clamping down on the fabric too tightly and causing it to pucker. So you can try loosening up your tension a little bit. You can also try changing your needle. So tension problems a lot of times come from a dull needle. That's the first thing that I look at when I start to get tension issues is how long have I been sewing on this needle? So change your needle, see if that helps. You can use some tissue paper that can help to just stabilize that seam. What else? Those are
Along the same lines of the needle. So I know you say dull needle, but like I think when I think of seam puckering, like I'm thinking of we've been talking about lining fabric and sewing on lining fabric. And you know how when you're sewing on something super lightweight, and say I'm going to go the whole other end of the spectrum, but maybe I just sewed that leather purse and I left that leather needle on there, and it almost like as soon as the needle goes through the fabric just like,
yeah,
comes
yes.
around. So it could be the wrong type of needle too.
Exactly. Yes, you can try. So when sewing on a lightweight fabric, and even that satin, I had to use a microtex needle for that. So the microtex needle is just has a very, very thin, sharp point. So that can help you get a nice, smooth seam, and also make sure that you're not punching big holes in your nice, fine fabric. So you might also need to go down to a lower gauge of needle too um, if you have a thinner all-purpose needle, you can try that before having to go out and buy a microtex needle, because the thinner gauge needles will, like I said, just they'll leave less of a footprint on your fabric. They'll leave smaller holes, and that a lot of times can help that thread lay down a nice, flat, even seam as well.
A comment here. Jamie says, I hate dull needles. My head and temper has exploded many times when I haven't realized that I need to change it out. I think we've all been there.
We have, yep. And a good sign of a dull needle too is if you start getting bad tension, but also sometimes you can hear it too. You can hear the needle struggling to get through the fabric, and a lot of times it'll be like a little funk, 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 and the fabric may even jump on your machine bed. And when you see that, it's time to change.
I know you and I differ on this. Like, you are very good about changing your needle with every project, every 68 hours. And I'm more of the type that waits for the change oil light to come on before I do anything. So I wait until I get to that point. And then when I start hearing that, then I change my needle. But speaking of needles, Jenna wants to know, what is an organ needle? It came with my machine.
So yeah, a lot of times they'll be in like the little paper packet. So Oregon is a brand of needle, and the ones that come with your machine are probably all-purpose needles.
Yeah.
Let me see if I have one.
I was looking to see if I had mine, and mine are all Schmetz right now.
I don't know what that one is. I don't think I have one right now, but yeah, I've seen those little paper packets before. Mm-hmm. Like this one came with my machine. That it doesn't say Oregon, but it's just like a generic type. But yeah, Oregon is a brand. So whatever needle is in your packet, hopefully it should say what kind it is.
She adds that it's much thinner than my regular machine needles. So, Oregon is just a brand of needle. So within, just like any other brand of needle, there's going to be different sizes. And yeah, hopefully it came marked. If you hold that package up again that you just showed, flip it around. It's not like, it has written.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. So they should.
Size.
Yeah. Yep. So
11, 14. So there's two in there. One's a size 11 and one's a size 14. So
yeah. So hopefully any needle you get should be marked.
And I like that Schmetz has like a different color coded system, so that once I take the needle out of the package and use it, and then sometimes when I switch needles out, I'll just like stick it in my pin cushion, and then forget what size it is and what type it is. You can look at the color and figure out, go on their website and figure out the chart for what it is. So
absolutely. All right, we have another question here. Carly asks, I have a dress pattern, but I want to change the neckline from a scoop to a cowl neck. How should I adjust the pattern?
Cool. That sounds like a fun alteration. Altering the neckline of a garment is one of the easiest ways to get a totally different look. So to go from a scoop, let me see if I've got a little mini pattern here. So a scoop might even be a little bit lower than this, but that's a decent scoop. So to get a cowl, so the cowl is like almost like a turtleneck, but not as tight to the neck. It's just like a big chunk of fabric that kind of sits around the neckline, kind of like a scarf, like a built-in scarf, kind of. So your cowl is essentially a big rectangle that gets stitched onto your neckline. So depending on how deep your scoop is on your pattern, you might be able to just leave it as it is and attach your big rectangle cowl right to the neckline. If it's a very deep scoop, you might want to pull it up a little bit so that it doesn't start like this is way too low to attach a cowl to. My cowl would be, dragging way down. I would want it more up here, like right by, is this the clavicle? I don't know, kind of like your collarbone, then up here a little bit. So bring that neckline up if you need to, and then you can kind of experiment with how big you want your cowl to be. And you want to make sure the cowl is the pattern's going to be double the length that you want the cowl to be because it's going to fold over. And then, so I would say, so you've got your rectangle for your cowl. Stitch the short ends together and then fold it with wrong sides together. So you've got your raw edges aligned, and then stitch those raw edges to your neckline with the right side of a cowl to the right side of the shirt. And then you probably want to top stitch your seam allowances, press them downward and top stitch. And then you'll have the cowl kind of, stitched to your neckline, and when you're wearing it, it'll kind of fall down around. You can even like fold it a little bit in the back along the shoulders, and then the front kind of drapes down in the front. I have a couple of cowl neck sweaters. It's a good style. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you're saying about not bringing it all the way up, like to where it is. You don't want it to be just like a puffy turtleneck. You definitely want it to have I shouldn't say drape, but you know what I mean, of the actual cowl. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Abby wants to know, what project are you guys working on? I need some inspiration.
Let's see. So I was just in Oregon visiting some friends, and my friend had cut out a pair of pants, like lounge pants out of knit fabric. She cut them out like 3 years ago, and it's been sitting in my closet. So I helped her finish those. So I made a pair of knit lounge pants. Had like a drawstring at the top, and it had drawstrings at the ankles. So it was kind of this cool, like loose, flowy type lounge pants. So that was a fun project to do. And then I'm making little key fobs, like quilted key fobs. I'm actually doing Facebook Live on Tuesday.
Okay.
Tune in if you want to see me make some little, that one's a quilted heart.
See, I knew quilting was eventually going to rub off on you. Like I knew it.
I'm starting small with little tiny quilting projects, but maybe I'll work my way up.
Perfect. See, and I'm always doing a quilting project, but then every time I have a conversation with you, then I get inspiration of maybe I should make a knit tank top and actually sew it. I never do it, but I do feel the inspiration to do it after talking to you. One of these days I will.
That's the first step.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Deb wants to know, what are sources for free garment patterns?
I know Mood Fabrics has some free garment patterns because I made a couple of them. They have, some sweaters. There's a free t-shirt pattern, which is a great basic pattern to then alter off of. So that's a good one to get. They have leggings patterns that are free. Um,
A hooded sweatshirt with almost a cowl neck, actually.
yeah, you did one of those. Yeah, that is almost a cowl.
Yeah.
So you can check out Mood Fabrics. And a lot of times when I'm looking for pattern shapes online, I will just type in what I want, like leggings pattern free. Those are my keywords. And there's a lot of sources out there. So yeah, a lot of different sewing blogs and a lot of times pattern companies too will sometimes put out free patterns. So it all depends on what you're looking for, but you can just type it in your search bar, and the internet is a wide and wonderful place, and you're sure to find what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to, National Sewing Circle, we have a bunch of free patterns. We don't necessarily have as many free garment patterns. I think that's going to be the main sort of hiccup you run into, is that obviously garment patterns, especially when it comes to, like, say we're going to ask Nikki to do a garment pattern and we expect her to do it in like 6 or 7 different sizes, like that's a lot of time and effort. So it's a little harder to find free garment patterns. But then when you do find free ones that are good free ones, they are going to be more of your basic pattern, and then you get to then expand on it and customize it and make it something cool and different. So don't be discouraged if you can't find exactly the garment you want in a free pattern. You can find the basic, the skirt, shirt, dress, whatever, and then go from there.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Follow up on our needle conversation from earlier, where we were talking about 11, 14, those sizes of needles. Lori asks, what would you use an 11 needle for versus a 14 needle?
So those numbers, so needle sizing can sometimes be a little confusing. So let's see. When you buy needle packages, it'll have 2 numbers on it. This is a size 80/12. So the higher number is the European size, and the lower number is the American size. So an 80/12 size is a fairly mid-range needle. That's a good all-purpose one to use. But the higher the number, the thicker the needle. So it's not like gauges where it's opposite. It's pretty straightforward, in that the larger the number, the thicker the needle. So this one is a 90/14. So it would be a little bit thicker, bigger than a size 80/12. So needle sizes range from 60/8 up to 120/20. So the 60/8 are very fine needles. They're good for lightweight fabrics like silk, chiffon, organza, lace, things that you don't want the needle to leave a big hole in. And then if you're sewing on thicker weight, heavier weight, even more densely woven fabrics like denim or leather, you might want to go up in size, in addition to going to a needle that is specifically designed for those fabrics. They do make jeans needles, which are specially designed for denim, and they make leather needles specially designed for leather and faux leather that have like a chisel tip, essentially, to drive through that really thick, heavy, dense material. So yeah, depending on what type of fabric you're using, you can go up or down in needle size. But yeah, like a 80/12 or 90/14 is a good all-purpose size. I'm trying to see what other sizes I have here, but like 75/11 is.
I think I buy those in the big giant bulk pack. Like that's the one I always use. Yeah. And Laura says, thank you. No one has ever explained that the larger number is a European number. So yeah, that's good to know. So you're not thinking you're getting 2 different sizes or something within one pack. So
yeah, that can be kind of confusing. So
yeah. Sue asks, how do I make an elastic waistband that can fit over my seat when I put it on, but also look nice when it's on my smaller waist? I'm looking to avoid zippers for this pair of pants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so elastic waistbands are a good option. The The only problem with that is you are going to have some gathering to gather in the fabric into the elastic. So you want to have enough fabric to, like you say, make it up over your hips and over the widest part of your body, so you can get into it. And then you want that elastic to cinch down tight enough on your waist to hold your pants up. So it depends kind of on the project you're doing and the fabric you're using, but an exposed elastic is kind of a fun detail you can use depending on what you're doing, but it's really easy installation too. So you don't have to make a tunnel or a casing or anything to attach the elastic to the upper edge of your garment. You just, leave a seam allowance at the upper edge of your garment and stitch the elastic to it. And the exposed elastic comes in different widths. I used a 2-inch wide elastic for a skirt one time, and it had like glitter on it. So,
I just got some of that the other day.
yeah, it's really fun. It's a really fun detail. So, so that's an option. Or if you wanted to do a casing at the upper edge, you could add, a couple of inches to the upper edge so that you could fold it down to make the casing, and then top stitch or edge stitch that fold to create your casing, and then tunnel your elastic through. I believe I have a video on National Sewing Circle of how to attach elastic to a waistband in a couple of different ways.
Mhm.
So that's something you might check out as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to say too, if you're worried about how it's going to look like once it cinches down, that exposed elastic is definitely, I think, the best way to go. Cause then you don't have to think about, cause I know just looking at Nikki and I, we have very different body types. You're very, very thin and narrow, and I am not so much. So I have that same issue when it comes to pants. And you don't necessarily want to, if you need this much pants to go over your hips, you don't necessarily want that much fabric also having to cinch down on the waistband. So having no fabric in the waistband, just having that exposed elastic instead makes it, I think, look a little bit nicer. That way you don't have so much gathered up around there. So I definitely think that's a great way to go. All right, Sarah says, not sure if this applies, but do either of you have any tips for fixing a run in tights? I have so many pairs with snags and holes, and I was thinking of maybe adding embellishments to cover up the holes.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't have any experience in that. I don't know if you could darn tights, but I see a lot of videos online of people covering up like tears in things with little hand embroidery designs, and I have never been able to do any of that. I haven't gotten into hand embroidery, despite loving how it looks. So I don't know if that would be an option. But because it's on tights, that's kind of tricky too, because you want it to be able to still stretch over your legs, and you don't want it to pull in weird ways. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I'm sorry.
And I'm thinking, I don't know I think you and I when I read tights or saw tights, I was thinking of when you were younger and when you were dressed and you wore tights that are the same color as your skin kind of thing. So whenever I don't know, maybe I think of leggings as one thing and tights as one thing. I'm not sure if they're the same or different, but when we always got runs in tights, you always stop the run by putting clear nail polish on it. And that stops it from going any further. But then of course you could even just leave it at that point. If it's the same color as your skin, you wouldn't see it. So, but I'm assuming with it wanting an embellishment, it may not be that. It might be the leggings route, but yeah, definitely a patch or something would work. But nail polish stops runs in tights.
That's a good tip.
Yes. I haven't worn them since I was 10, but I do know that works. All right. Vicky says, how do I make an elastic waistband that doesn't roll?
So yes, it doesn't roll. So yeah, a lot of times in a waistband, the elastic will twist, especially after you've thrown them in the washer and the dryer. A good easy tip to stop that is to run a little stitch at the side seams, or if you don't have side seams, just at the sides. Just a vertical stitch just down the waistband to attach that elastic to the casing in a couple of spots so that it doesn't get all twisted up. And that doesn't affect the stretch of it, just by essentially tacking it in two places. It'll just stop it from getting super twisted.
Yes. They also do make something called no roll elastic. And I mean, it's sort of just, I think it probably still could roll, but that's sort of just like their selling point. But can you also just touch real quick on the different types of elastic and maybe which one is a little bit better, braided versus woven, for an actual waistband? Make sure you're using the correct elastic, because I think that can, uh, if you use the wrong type, it's going to be more apt to roll than versus if you get this nice thick, woven elastic that's going to be sturdy. You kind of set yourself up for success that way.
Yeah. There are a bunch of different types of elastic, and it can seem like confusing to get the right kind, but the width of elastic is an important factor. So you want to make sure you're using, an elastic that's wide enough to fill up your casing without being too big for your casing, essentially. Because if your casing is 1 inch and you use a 1/2 inch elastic, that elastic's going to float around in the casing, and it's going to look weird. So I like to let my casing be only like 1/8. A 1/4 inch might even be too much, bigger than the elastic. So if you make your casing the same size as the elastic, sometimes it's hard to tunnel the elastic through, and then you have a different set of problems. So there is braided versus knit elastic is kind of a distinction in the way that the elastic is created. So braided elastic is a very basic type of elastic. It's got horizontal ribs, so you can kind of see, if you can't see it just by looking at it, if you give it a stretch, sometimes those ribs will become more pronounced. Braided elastic is kind of lighter weight and thinner than an elastic that might be woven from elastic threads. The knit elastic is very soft and it's very comfortable to wear as a waistband. Let's see. I have some notes written on elastics from when I did that elastic video in National Sewing Circle. The non-roll elastic says it resists twisting and rolling, which makes it good for waistbands. But also, if you just use that tip that I just mentioned, you can use a different kind of elastic in your waistband, and it won't roll. So the elastic that has little like loops on the edge is called picot edge elastic, and that's great for lingerie, or if you're sewing, underwear. It's great for the leg holes because it is soft and pliant while still giving a little bit of stretch, and those picot edges can be used decoratively, so you can kind of like leave them poking out, or you can stitch them, inside, fold them in, and that picot edge helps it to like curve around curves really nicely. So it's good for, tight curves and such. Let's see. You've got your elastic cord, which is different from elastic
Thread,
I guess. Yeah. So the elastic cord is, thicker. It's good for making like beaded bracelets and stuff. But the elastic thread is wound onto a spool, or just like a narrow tube kind of. And that's for winding on your bobbin for stitching and for smocking and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's the best way, probably, rather than me just like rattling off terms. And what the method that I use when I choose elastic is really to just go to the store and touch them.
Yeah.
Just touch them, just feel them. I like a good kind of stiff elastic for a waistband because I know it's going to hold its shape and it's not going to just like crumple inside of my waistband.
Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of getting your hands on things and getting a feel for them is a good way to find the right type of elastic for your specific project.
Absolutely. Shop for elastic the same way that you shop for fabric. You might as well just go feel them all, touch them, make sure it's what you want to use for your project. We have a comment here. Vicky was adding to our conversation about tights. She says back in her day, she used hairspray to stop runs and hose. So that's the second time we have referenced hairspray. So even if you don't use it in your hair, you might want to get some for your sewing room, So speaking of that, I saw this question come in earlier, and Emma asked, what are some unconventional sewing tools you'd recommend?
We love this. We've talked about this before. Things that you kind of steal from your kitchen and use in your sewing.
Rolling pin.
That was the first thing that came to my mind. So the rolling pin is a good one. You use that to press open seams, especially on leather that you don't want to touch with your iron. Using pressure with your rolling pin is great.
Yep.
I use chip clips a lot of times. Wonder clips are better because they're a little bit easier to use, but I have these already, chip clips in my kitchen, so I didn't have to go buy a new tool. But I use that for when I don't want to pin things, whether it's it's leather and you can't really pin it, or if it's just too thick to get a pin through. I'll just clip with my chip clips or my binder clips, those black and metal binder clips. That's sometimes as well.
Yeah, I never have things. I was looking again. I never have things within reach that I want to show, but the same brush that I use on my eyebrows is actually what I use to clean out my machine, like in the bobbin area, just because it's a little bit longer to hold than the actual little tiny one that comes with your machine. So yeah, go to your cosmetics aisle or your kitchen aisle, or you find all sorts of fun, unconventional things. Next one here, and I know this is something that you and I actually agree on. Hannah says she's looking for new scissors. So what brand of scissors do you use?
I love my Ginger scissors. And
I actually have mine. Look at that.
I don't have mine. I love the sound they make.
I know. They're just super sharp. Yeah.
Samurai sword. I love them. They are super sharp all the way to the tip. I have not had to sharpen them yet, and I've been using them for many years.
Same here. I have the Ginger shears, and then I use the Ginger snips too. So same sound, just smaller. And I like that. I mean, obviously you can get them at your local quilt and fabric shops, but I actually even got mine online through Amazon. So you can get them. They're more readily available today than I feel like they were when they first came out and were so popular. So Carly says, funny thing, my daughter is always asking me to alter clothes for my granddaughter, which I love to do, but I want to work on my projects. You guys are getting me inspired. So yes, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. Amanda asks, do you know of a rotary cutter that has a guard on it that is safer for kids?
Yes, I know they make them. I don't remember the brand or name of it. But they make them that have the guard on that will only cut when you go to press down on it, and the guard kind of retracts. Otherwise, when you take it up off of the the mat that you're cutting on, the guard like flips back.
So and this is similar to that. It's not quite, so it's more of like it has a lock, and as soon as you undo the lock, then this is the handle. As soon as you touch the handle, it exposes the blade. So kind of like that, but still, I mean, my son is in my sewing room all the time, and he knows how to sew, he knows how to pin, and he knows. I still don't let him touch the rotary cutter. I don't know that even with a guard on it, it's still so sharp. So, but they definitely do have a bunch of different ways, and obviously, like when you're not using it, make sure that lock is on, and then squeeze it as much as you want, but the blade's not going to come out.
Yeah. Yep. I know mine has a lock on it too, but I like that yours, you have to kind of pull the trigger to get the blade out. Mine doesn't even have that safety feature. So that's a little bit better. But yeah, they're super dangerous and sharp. One time I was cutting, and then I went to like lift the rotary cutter up, and it like nicked my finger. I had to go to the emergency room.
I remember you got like stitches and stuff too, didn't you?
Yeah, well, it was glue stitches. It wasn't like an
It
actual
counts.
stitch, but they glued me together. Yeah, that hurt. That's the only time I've ever like really injured myself in my sewing room. It's no joke.
See, I feel like that's what scarred you. You thought it was like a quilting tool, and that's why you're like, oh, I'm not going to quilt for a while. So,
Yeah, maybe.
all right. Wendy wants to know, what is the best seam for rayon or silky fabrics? A French seam, or do you have another suggestion?
A French seam is a great option because rayon does ravel bad. So you definitely want to take care of those edges to make sure you don't get an unraveled mess. And it just also, it helps lengthen the life of the garment too by protecting those seam allowances. So yes, a French seam is a great option. You can also do a lapped seam. Is that what it's called? Where you trim down one seam allowance and you
Flat felt.
Flat felt. Thank you. Boy, I'm getting old. I'm blanking on terminology today. The flat felt seam is great because it encases your seam allowances and it makes a really nice, strong seam. And because rayon is so thin, it's not going to add a bunch of bulk. So that's another good one. If you have time and patience, the Hong Kong seam is fun too, because you can then add like a different colored binding kind of to the seam allowance raw edges, and it helps protect them. It also it adds a little bit of weight because you're adding more fabric to the inside of the garment, which can sometimes be a really good thing. Because if you're doing like a rayon skirt and it's like super floaty, adding that extra weight with the binding to the seam allowances on the inside can help it hang a little bit nicer rather than staticking to your legs or your tights. It helps just add weight and helping it to hang. So those are a couple of options. But yeah, I would definitely do something to encase those seam allowances.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, if you're starting to feel old, we're all doomed because I think you're the youngest one here. So just to, because you did kind of touch on, we even have videos on National Sewing Circle. You've done one for us on the Hong Kong seam. I know I've done one on the flat felt and French seam both, but you kind of described how you do a flat felt seam. But if someone has never done a French seam, can you explain how you would do a French seam?
Yes, so the French seam can seem weird and kind of counterintuitive because you're sewing with the wrong sides. Yes, the wrong sides together first, which, you know, you're usually always sewing the right sides together so that the seam allowance is on the inside. But you want to sew with the wrong sides together first using using a narrower seam allowance, and then you flip it so that the right sides are together and then sew it again. So you have to trim the seam allowance, flip it, and then sew it again so that that you are encasing those raw edges within that, and you know you finally get to what your seam allowance should be for the garment.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and it's a fun one because I think when I first learned that what a French seam was, like, you know, traditionally you're thinking garments 5/8 inch seam allowance, so you have 3/8 on one and then a quarter on the other. And I thought that was all you could ever do it on, but really you can do it on any seam allowance you want. Say you want a 1/2 inch, you just divide it by 2 essentially because you're doing it twice. But fun fact, always remember to trim that first seam allowance, because if you don't, then when you actually do right sides together and you open it up and you expect this perfect, pretty seam and you have all of those little tiny fingers, and they're really hard to trim off. So always make sure you trim that first seam you do, maybe even extra narrow so that it doesn't stick through at all, because
yes,
it's a bummer to undo. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here to answer everybody's questions and hopefully give some people some extra inspiration. Carly, you need to start working on some projects for you. And if anyone is looking for some additional extra inspiration, National Sewing Circle has a bunch of free patterns, and our download for today is a fun, free little cactus pincushion project. So if you're looking for something fun to make and fun to make with the kids, definitely click on that and download that. But thank you again for being here and answering everyone's questions.
Thank you everyone for watching.